what she just wrote last month is exactly what I was telling. This has overreaching implications for planetary defense because it's a totally different ball game to hit a rock pile with a deflector than it is to hit a solid asteroid.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. This is Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, host of the Weekly Worldview, Bible student, science geek, amateur comedian. Fred, it is great to be back with you talking about real science on Friday.
Well, welcome, Doug. This week we're going to hear more about the Hydroplate Theory and all the latest news coming from space. It's no secret to those paying attention that NASA and the secular science community have been shocked and dumbfounded by recent discoveries in comets and asteroids.
Yes, this should be good, Fred. We have Kevin Lee, the pastor of Calvary Church in Port Orchard, Washington. He's the husband of Juanita for over 40 years, a father, a Navy vet, and a faithful servant of Jesus Christ, preaching the gospel and the Lord's creation. Pastor Kevin Lee, welcome to Real Science Radio.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be with you, gentlemen.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah, great to have you,
Before we
Kevin.
get to news from space, before we get to all the incoming news from space, are you ready for Fred to hit us with the Real Science Radio interesting fact of the week?
I would love to hear it.
All right, here we
All
go.
right. So here we go. Here's the interesting fact of the week. What is the hottest planet in our solar system?
Let's do it again.
The hottest
So it
planet
just
in our
seems
solar
too
system.
easy. It just seems too easy, so the obvious answer is never the right answer. Okay, then I'll just go with Venus because it's not Mercury.
Hey, you don't get buzzed. But boy, that's 3 now, Doug. Good job.
What? Okay, that was just dumb luck.
It's, well, remember Dr. Paul Homan? So Dr. Homan, he was on Real Science Radio talking about climate change and, what affects, what's that climate, the blanket around the Earth? Well, Venus has a similar blanket around its atmosphere. It's got a carbon dioxide surrounds its atmosphere, and so it's like a blanket, and it makes Venus hotter than Mercury, actually. So good job.
Way to go, guy.
Wow.
Way to go with the non-obvious answer.
It's just a lesson for all you young kids out there. Showing up is 90%. That's it. Just show up.
That's right. That's right. My co-host is learning how to get around these trick questions. Good job. Kevin, did you have that one?
I'd be lying if I said, yeah, that was good information. I should be tuning into Real Science Radio more often.
Kevin, we want to talk about what you've uncovered recently, and you've uncovered a ton of stuff from comets and asteroids, and I know you've reached out to the secular scientific community. So I'm excited to hear what you've learned here recently that ties in with the hydroplate theory. I mean, the evidence for the hydroplate theory, we believe from space, just keeps getting more and more conclusive, if I can even be so hyperbolic. It's just, to me, it's overwhelming. And I'm excited for our audience to hear more about what you've uncovered or helped expose, let's say. I mean, it's always been there, the evidence.
I haven't really discovered anything. I just have a different paradigm than NASA and the European Space Agency. I have a paradigm that is consistent with the facts that are being found by space probes. What NASA and ESA, European Space Agency, are finding is every time they send a space probe into space to confirm their paradigm, they find out it's not true. And so really all you have to, in other words, a relatively uneducated, as far as doctorate degrees and everything, person that has a paradigm that's based on the truth is going to be better able to predict what they're going to find than somebody that has all the degrees that's looking in the wrong place. And DART has been one of those examples. The dual asteroid redirection test mission is for those that follow the paradigm of Dr. Walt Brown's explanation of where the origin of asteroids and comets, based on scientific evidence, our paradigm, we knew, everybody's known that asteroids are floating rock piles loosely held together by gravity. We knew that. And a space probe that was sent to DART, the DART space probe sent to Dimorphos, the moon of Didymus, another asteroid, impacting Dimorphos, we knew what was going to happen. So it's not like we're some brilliant, prophecy people. We just know where the origin of comets and asteroids. And everything, and we can predict on this show that these future space probes are going to find the exact same evidence that all asteroids, comets are floating rock piles, except for the small asteroids that are fast spinning asteroids. You can have a rock and meteors that have hit the Earth, meteorites and meteoroids. Those are floating around as single, but hydroplate theory explains those too. But if it's a bigger body, then it's going to be a floating rock pile. Anything over 200 meters, any asteroid greater than 200 meters is a floating rock pile, based on the hydroplate theory, and all evidence supports that.
And so just quickly for the audience, the hydroplate theory posits that the asteroids and comets that are flying around in space came from the Earth when the fountains of the Great Deep broke up, and some of the material left Earth's gravitational field and went out into space. And then these bodies that were flying through space, some of them slowed down, they were close to each other, and they came together as comets, asteroids, and the like. Is that about right?
Well, I would, for the audience, try and clarify just a little bit more that the Earth was created with an ocean of water under the crust. Pressure built up, the crust ruptured. And when the crust ruptured, that supercritical temperature water has explosive energy, and it was able to erode the sides of the crack and all the fauna on top of the Earth, all the vegetation, the trees and everything. As that crack grew, that's some of that material was accelerated to escape velocity of the Earth, which is 7 miles a second. And so water and debris, both rock and organic material from the surface of the Earth, were jettisoned away from the Earth at escape velocity, which means that material is going to go into its own orbits around the sun. And the Earth didn't jettison asteroids. It didn't jettison comets. It jettisoned material that in the vacuum of space, under the sphere of influence of the sun instead of the Earth, came together through aerobraking, a term called aerobraking, which is, the atmosphere of the water around this debris pile would have caused the relative motions to slow down because it's running into the resistance, the air, the friction of the water molecules were slowing down the relative motion, and then gravity, their own gravity, brought them together in a very loosely held together pile of comets and asteroids. The difference between comets and asteroids is that asteroids are, for the most part, have lost all their water through, the solar radiation, the solar wind, pushing all the water away over the hundreds of years. Comets, because they're bigger, held on to their water, and they were jettisoned with more velocity that sent them further out into the solar system to keep their water. And they're in their more highly elliptical, further out orbits. So some material was jettisoned with a very high velocity, and some was jettisoned with a velocity just barely enough to leave Earth's gravitational attraction and go into orbits around the sun. So that's the way I would explain it.
So that's the hydroplates theory on comets and asteroids. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dr. Walt Brown, because he started with the Bible and came up with this theory, and based on things he was observing, he put predictions in his book, and predictions are the hard currency of science. And he predicted that NASA would find that these asteroids are floating rock piles. And guess what? NASA ended up discovering that. And Kevin, recently, I guess about 2 years ago now, wasn't it, that the DART spacecraft crashed into a meteorite? And it's interesting watching it because as you see the film, as you watch the NASA live feed, this thing's heading towards this asteroid and it looks like a rock, okay? But as that thing starts to get closer and closer, it becomes crystal clear that it's a rock pile. Yeah. Just exactly as Walt Brown had predicted. And so, Kevin, you made a prediction based on that collision into that rock pile, based on knowledge of the hydroplate theory, which is the only theory that can explain why you have a rock pile in space, by the way. And rock, why are these rocks coalesced together, loosely gravitationally held? And the only explanation is that, coming from Earth, they were shooting up through the fountains of the Great Deep, and they're already certain rocks that were already close to each other, they remain gravitationally bound. Because otherwise, how do astrophysicists explain it? They're always dumbfounded, just like we said at the beginning of the show. But we're not dumbfounded, are we, Kevin and Doug?
No, we're not confounded at all. In fact, again, based on all the evidence up to 2016, that Dr. Brown was right. His paradigm is supported by scientific fact and evidence. I contacted Dr. Brownlee in an email. He never responded to me, but it didn't bounce. It was a good email. I talked to him on the phone. Dr. Brownlee was the head of the Stardust Space Probe mission, and he and I talked on the phone about the evidence of finding glycine, left-handed amino acid, on the Stardust Space Probe from the Vil-2 comet. He was shocked. And so then I wrote him an email and I said, because I was picking up in the news, as we all know, that NASA and European Space Agency and others are spending billions of dollars trying to find and deflect or somehow keep an extinction level event, asteroid or comet, from hitting the Earth. And so then I was, since Dr. Brownlee is very esteemed in the aeronautics world, I wrote this to him on June 22nd, 2016, before I even knew DART was even something that was going to happen. In fact, it's right at this time they're funding the DART project. And I had no idea. And I said, any plan to deflect an asteroid will have to be based on assumptions about the composition of the asteroid. The physics behind the chosen plan may work for one composition, parent solid rock, and fail if the asteroid consists of a loosely held together rock pile. And then I said, why don't we get together? He lives here in Washington, and I was saying, hey, we don't have to, I won't record anything, I won't talk about it if you want to, but I was sincerely concerned that we should do what's right. If we're going to spend billions of dollars with deflection tests, we should have the best foot forward on what we're expecting any deflection tests to hit. Well, most scientists believe that when the DART mission was sent to impact Dimorphos, the moon of Didymus, that it was going to be a solid rock. In fact, when the NASA lead on the day of impact, the lady that was, and I'm forgetting her name right now, I have it written down. If you watch that video, she goes, "Oh, that doesn't look like a solid, rock to me."
Yeah.
So they were surprised.
Great.
Now, there was another scientist out of Europe that had 3 months before DART impact, she published a report on what would happen if it is a floating rock pile. So they wait till then. And I speculate, I don't know. I'm going to try and get hold of her as well. But it's going to be more difficult. I think she's in Italy. That I suspect they were going, you know what, with all the evidence coming in that these asteroids are floating rock piles, maybe we ought to, at this point, just before DART hits, do a little study of what we think is going to happen. And this is researchers, this is the article for people that want to read it. This is July 2nd, 2022. The impact of DART was in September. Researchers simulate defense tests against potential asteroid impacts on Earth. And Sabina Rudican was the lead investigator on this test, and their simulation was, if it is a rock pile, it's going to eject a bunch of debris and it's going to mess with the asteroid, and so that's easy to predict. If it's a rock pile, if you 14,000 miles an hour send a several 100-pound impactor into a relatively small asteroid, you're going to be like hitting all those millions of rocks, and they're going to be jettisoning out from that moon. And that's exactly what happened. That's what I quote predicted, but it's not really a prediction. It's just like, if you hit a relatively spherical pile of rocks only held together by gravity with an impactor going 14, which is 2.7 tons worth of TNT, then you are going to do everything that they now know happened.
Yes, and the video showed it happen.
Yep.
We can see it happen. It was all recorded.
Yep.
When you have prediction after prediction after prediction after prediction, and they're coming true, you have a pretty good idea that maybe your theory is the correct one. So it makes it easier going forward. Like you said, Kevin, make these predictions. I mean, it's like predicting the Pope's Catholic. I mean, we know that these things are going to happen because time and time again, we're seeing this kind of evidence. And again, I don't want to sound like, I'm overreaching, but from what I've seen through the years now, the evidence for the hydroplate from space, and we could talk about the evidence on the Earth, which we believe is really very powerful, but from space, to me, it's conclusive. It's becoming conclusive because it just keeps coming in. My favorite still remains finding an Earth rock on the moon that came from 20 miles beneath the Earth's surface, according to NASA. That wasn't according to Fred Williams or Doug McBurney or Kevin on Real Science Radio. That was according to NASA. What is an Earth rock doing on the moon? And now we're finding these materials from these asteroids and comets that, in my view, again, conclusively show they came from Earth. Where else did they come from?
In a phone conversation with Dr. Brownlee, I said, Dr. Brownlee, everything that we are finding in space on comets and asteroids can be explained by the premise that the Earth ejected rock and organic debris at escape velocity into space, and that explains everything we know. He did not dispute that. And I said, the only part that makes it so difficult is that what mechanism would cause the Earth to eject material into space and still leave us with an Earth that we have today? And Dr. Brown answers that question as well. And the other thing I could have added and the only other thing that makes it impossible for anybody to accept is because that would then make the Bible correct in saying that there was a global flood at one time when the fountains of the great deep burst up. And that's the real...
Now there... Yeah. Whoa. Now that's where you run into problems. It's similar to the wall you hit with the origin of life researchers when you hit them with all the evidence that it's very obvious that how this happened. This had to have been designed, and you hit a wall there. And so you've talked with other researchers involved with DART since. And can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, this radio broadcast actually had its origins with another article coming out about the DART results, and the title of the article is "Asteroid Hit by NASA Spacecraft Was Reshaped by the Collision Study Finds," and it's by Will Sullivan out of the Smithsonian Magazine. So again, this isn't a real science radio publication. This is a Smithsonian. And by the way, our website for our church is calvarypo.org. And you can search on Hydroplate Theory. We have a media handout section on the Hydroplate Theory and this article with my comments and a lot of other articles that come out of space with my comments. are posted at the website. So this was February 28th, 2024. So this is just a month ago. And what it says here is that in a new study published Monday in the journal Nature Astronomy, researchers examined this collision more closely, and they found that rather than being a solid object, the asteroid called Dimorphos is more like a pile of rubble, weakly held together by gravity. And instead of just forming an impact crater, which is what they were thinking was going to happen, DART's crash actually reshaped the asteroid. And goes on to say that it ejected 1% of Dimorphos's mass. And I'm going to say right now, they don't really know it's 1% because they don't even know the mass of Dimorphos. They're sending, the European Space Agency in October of this year is sending a space probe out to go map the exact density of Dimorphos. And the fact that they slowed it down they planned that the DART mission, they thought, we're going to succeed in doing a deflection test on this moon if we cause it to, if we change its orbital period around Didymus, the mother asteroid, if we change it by 73 seconds, then we successfully achieved a redirection test. And you know what it turned out to be? 33 minutes. Instead of 73 seconds, it was 33 minutes. Now, and I wrote Dr. Brownlee a question. Dr. Brownlee, and he never answered. And I know it got to him because it went through a NASA fellow friend of his, and it didn't bounce on her. How in the world did we miss it by that much? And to me, the only explanation is that they were counting on Dimorphos being a rock, a solid rock density. Didymus is a floating rock pile which has a bunch of empty volume inside of it because it's not a solid rock. And so because it was so much less dense than what they thought, it had a greater impact of changing its orbital period around Didymus. But he hasn't gotten back to me, and I'm still waiting. And really, it's just the physics of it would make it that that's the case. And so,
Pastor Lee, just real quickly, I want to interrupt because you just enlightened me on something that I hadn't really thought about much. But you're saying that all the greatest minds and the leaders of space exploration and the people who should know about and tell us they know about all these heavenly bodies, they don't know right now the actual mass of Didymus. They don't know. They have to send a probe to find out.
Yep, that's exactly that. That is a fact.
So anyway, that's kind of startling, especially if, let's say, you've believed the science headlines your whole life that these people know all this, and you'd think they would have known this before they sent a probe to hit it. I mean, I don't know.
They make assumptions. They make assumptions, and that's exactly what happened in this this one paper that came out 3 months before What If It's a Rock Pile, and they just ran a bunch of simulations to determine whether or not, with what they knew. They know what the mass of their probe is. They know the velocity of their probe. They make guesses about everything else. Oh, and actually, this article of, hey, it was reshaped the collision. As soon as they knew what happened, then they took what they knew. Forces of gravity, velocity, mass.
Right.
And then they go, what we don't know is, the shape, what it consists of. And they finally realized the only way our simulation works for what actually happened is it was a floating rock pile.
Yeah.
And so they're a little bit better now at knowing what the mass is because...
Well, so that's one of the advantages of actually doing a physical experiment.
Yep.
Because then you find out what really is.
What really happens. So anyway, in the same article where they're admitting it's a floating rock pile, oh, surprise, surprise, for non-hydroplate theory people. And then there was this statement, the reshaping of Dimorphos is, and this is quote, completely outside of the realm of physics as we understand it, quote. in our everyday lives on Earth, Cristina Thomas, actually Dr. Cristina Thomas, who is the leader of the DART Observations Working Group and did not contribute to the recent findings, tells the New York Times this is overarching implications for planetary defense. And now, that statement right there by Dr. Thomas is exactly what I wrote to Dr. Brownlee in 2016, June 22nd, 2016.
2016.
Yeah, it's exactly what she just wrote last month is exactly what I was telling. This has overreaching implications for planetary defense because it's a totally different ball game to hit a rock pile with a deflector than it is to hit a solid asteroid. And so if they realize, wow, how are we going to hit the next one that we don't have time to go out and take a picture to find out if it's another rock pile? We can offer our services to them for free. Don't waste your time. It's a floating rock pile. And so, actually, another professor of astronautics at the Air Force Academy, who is a hydroplate theory advocate, I talked to him about all of this here this last week, and he said the fact that asteroids are floating rock pile, it bodes well for the inhabitants of the world, of Earth, if an asteroid hits, because it would be more destructive if it was solid. So in other words, if an asteroid's going to come at us, you would rather be hit with birdshot than to be hit with a shotgun slug. And so this is going to be, the scientists really should get their act together on this to change their paradigm and smell the coffee. They're wrong. Their paradigm is wrong. They're all floating rock piles, even though they can't explain how a floating rock pile would come. And to realize, wow, we need to look at this from a floating rock. And the Bible, I'm going to invoke the Bible here if I can as a pastor. The Bible says the Earth is going to be hit what looks like comets, asteroids, and the people of the Earth are going to be hiding themselves from the hail of rock coming down on the Earth. Because it will be a floating rock pile.
The buckshot.
It's going to be like birdshot. So even the Bible indicates that when these things come down, they're going to hit us. They're going to be that way. So anyway, I didn't know what Dr. Cristina Thomas meant by that quote, completely outside the realm of physics as we understand it. So I called her yesterday. So I was able to contact her, praise God. And I said, what did you mean? And she said that, what did she mean by the quote? She said that physics in space are not as easily understood by people who understand physics as applied on Earth. She wasn't saying what I thought she was saying. I was thinking she can't be saying that we can't understand. This is physics that is beyond anything that we know, that Dimorphos hit a rock pile and caused debris to be ejected and all the other stuff, because that's college level engineering physics, orbital physics.
Right.
I mean, that's not strange physics. And so I was thinking that she was maybe saying this is beyond our understanding of physics of how a rock pile could form as the moon of Dinkinesh. That's what I thought she was saying, and I wanted to. No, that's not what she said. She's saying that people understand physics here, like if you fall off a trampoline, you'll fall and break your leg. But they have a hard time understanding, how a tail is going to go off of hitting this rock pile, and how it's going to change the orbit around Dinkinesh and stuff. That it's harder to understand physics in the vacuum of space compared to how we understand physics down here. So it was less of a aha moment than what I was thinking she was saying. But then,
so this is Cristina Thomas from Northern Arizona, right? She's a professor down there.
Yeah, she's
like a big shot in that field.
She's an assistant professor in the Department of Astronomy and Planetary Science at Northern Arizona University. So she's trying to she's at the university trying to figure out how these things form. And she doesn't know. She admitted they do not know how Dimorphos got a moon. And she goes, we're learning, we're trying to experience. This is an increasing science of how asteroid moons, binary asteroid moons can form. And right now, she's saying, and this is what she told me, they believe, completely contrary to physics, that solar energy from the sun spins up the mother asteroid, increases its axial orbital, how fast the asteroid is spinning. And so at the equator, where the centrifugal force is the greatest, rock that was on the mother asteroid decides, oh, you're spinning too fast on the merry-go-round and I'm going to go flying off. And so then the rocks flying off the equator of Didymos is leaving Didymos and then decides to go be a loosely held together rock pile moon called Dimorphos. And again, people might be saying, isn't your guest a pastor, a Christian pastor? Yes. Before I was a pastor, I had a real job in the nuclear engineering department in the shipyard, and I took orbital physics engineering courses. And actually what I told her when she said that, I said, you know what, when I was taking, my orbital physics professor really misled me in science class because that is impossible. A mother asteroid is not going to, first of all, the solar energy cannot increase the angular momentum of that asteroid spinning it up. It can accelerate it with other, radiometers that, here's a radiometer. and this radiometer, when the sun hits it, it can cause these vanes to turn around quicker. But it can't turn an asteroid that has all that surface area. It'll speed up the asteroid in its orbit around the sun, but it's not going to spin it up. Mm-hmm. So then, and even if it did, even if it spun it up, as the debris is leaving the equator, it's going in millions of different velocities and angles. It's
right,
not
and
gonna,
so in space, wouldn't it just keep going
together in the vacuum of space to become a moon?
Yeah.
Let me make a plug real quick, Kevin. You've got a video on your website that you mentioned earlier, and you have a presentation, The Origin of Comets, Asteroids, and Trans-Neptunian Objects. And one of the points you make is the Lagrange point. And I encourage people to go watch your video on how you present that. And there's physics that we can trust and know is why these asteroids are all in this belt. It makes a lot of sense. But having, her explanation of this, solar winds or whatever spinning this planet, and then you get rock piles, none of that works with physics. And you mentioned Dr. Rob Brown. He's a professor at the Air Force Academy. I think he's got his PhD in aeronautics engineering from Colorado University. I know that he's going to refute that right away. I mean, because that even just common sense says that doesn't work. I don't even have to have a physics degree to know that sounds like nonsense to me.
It is, and what the deal is they now know it's a rock pile, and so now it's in the same way that we were talking about yesterday, that in the Smithsonian Institute we still have monkey to man pictures, the knuckle dragging ape like creature that just progresses until it's a man, and they have no science to back it up, but they know it can't be the Bible saying in the beginning God created man. Because, that's, we can't have that. So the same thing, they are finding things in space that are completely contrary to what they thought. And they're trying to put together fairy tales to explain it. And in doing so, they ignore science that says you're wrong. They ignore science that says you're wrong. And I didn't have a chance to talk to Dr. Thomas about this because, our conversation continued, but then she had to go. And actually, she wanted to go when I said that really everybody was thinking these things were solid because you can't really explain how come they're floating rock piles. And you can't explain how they're floating rock piles except from hydroplate theory. So, and then I wish I would have had time to talk to her about this article. And I don't know if you can see, I'll put it there for everybody to see. Because NASA
We will post a link.
it's called Strange Moon of Asteroid Dinkinesh is weirder than thought after NASA probe finds contact binary. Now,
Yeah.
and this was by Brett Tingley, November 7th, 2023, from another Christian website called space.com. I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
Another hydroplate theory advocate.
Yeah. Can you tell the audience really quick what a contact binary is?
Yeah, it's when a contact binary is that they're finding, even out in the trans-Neptunian objects, they find that there's things floating in space that are not just one solid rock or pile of rocks, that there's actually right next to it a moon. Like in the case of DART, there was the Dimorphos, the Dinkinesh mother asteroid, and Dimorphos the moon. And so they see that they're separate, and that shocked them. I mean, it blew them away the first time that they even noticed that there was two asteroids floating together. And then they started finding out that there's some asteroids and comets where the two objects actually come together and touch. The 67P comet that they call the duck comet because it has a head and it has a body. They know as a fact that at one time they were two separate bodies of the comet, gravitationally attracted to each other, and somehow, only explained by the hydroplate theory, because there was aerobraking, there was an atmosphere of water that would have slowed down their relative motions until they slowly touch each other and they become a contact binary. So, once again, Dr. Thomas was explaining how mother asteroid spins up, defying the laws of physics, throws its material off, and it becomes a moon. So as the Lucy probe has been sent to go to Jupiter's Trojan asteroids, and Fred, you just mentioned the Lagrange points, and without getting too complex here, there's gravity wells. Lagrange points are gravity wells that, in the case of Jupiter, are just before Jupiter and its orbital path around the sun and just behind the orbital path. And it's extremely difficult to explain why there are thousands of asteroids locked into those two gravity wells in front of and behind Jupiter in its orbital path. And they're sending this Lucy probe out to go and look at these asteroids and try and understand why they're there. On the way to the asteroid gravity wells, the Lagrange points of Jupiter, for the Trojan inspection, it went past this other asteroid. The Lucy probe went past Dinkinesh because it was on the way, and the NASA people said, "Hey, let's while we're on the way out to the Trojans, let's go look at this Dinkinesh." And what they found is that the Dinkinesh asteroid has a moon, just like Dinkinesh had the Dimorphos moon that the DART project ran into the moon. But what they didn't know is that the moon is actually a contact binary. So now the moon of Dinkinesh, the moon of Dinkinesh has two bodies that are equal mass. I mean, they're equal volume, equal size, and touching each other. That completely destroys Dr. Thomas's explanation to me yesterday of how they think asteroids form. It's one thing to spin up the mother asteroid without the laws of physics, in violation of the laws of physics. You can't, the debris that comes off of that spinning up asteroid in violation of the laws of physics somehow comes together to be a moon. But even she would not try and explain how then it became two solid balls that came together as a moon.
Yeah, and it defies explanation. And by the way, Pastor Lee, this theory of a spinning mother body then spinning off debris, did they form this theory while still thinking that the mother asteroid was basically a solid rock?
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, how can I didn't ask her. I didn't ask her, and I haven't read the. She goes, you need to read the current papers on asteroid creation. So
okay.
So I'm ignorant about what they're saying, but you picked up a very good point, Doug. If you're thinking it's solid, how does that debris come off to create a millions of rocks and rubble moon? Exactly.
Well, we'll have to read the papers so that maybe we'll be enlightened, but that's a tough question.
It's a very tough question. And so here's this article again. The strange moon of Dinkinesh is weirder than thought. These are their comments. Yeah. Where it says, it sits in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. You know, again, this space probe is going out towards further out towards Jupiter to go to where the Trojans are. And in a NASA statement, the Lucy team writes that Dinky's, they call it Dinky, Dinky's smaller satellite, its moon, the equivalent of Dimorphos for the dark probe, smaller satellite is itself a type of binary system known as a contact binary, meaning the two smaller objects are in contact with one another. This means Dinky isn't made up of one or two, but rather three components. It is puzzling to say the least. The Southwest Research Institute's Hal Livison, principal investigator for Lucy, said in the statement that it's puzzling to say the least. I would have never expected a system that looks like this. Doug, did you expect it to look like that?
I expected it.
Brad, did you expect it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, I expected it. I mean, just having a basic physics knowledge and knowing if you trust what that the hydroplate's already been proven itself over and over again, I definitely expected it without question. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, the hydroplate theory has multiple dozens and dozens of fulfillment that allows us to know. I mean, we know this is how it happened, and so and all the evidence supports it. And so he goes on. Hal Livison goes on to say, "I would never have expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out." And I said, they're never going to figure it out. Not unless they figure it's impossible to figure out with the physics of these bodies have been in the vacuum of space for their entire life, and they all came out of the Big Bang, which of course Bob Enyart and Real Science Radio has proved is a dead theory itself. And the Webb telescope is proving that it's a dead theory itself. In fact, you know, I have a web article here that is another time that the Webb telescope is showing that the Big Bang paradigm is wrong. And then he goes on to say, we'd been puzzling over odd variations in Dinkinesh's brightness that we saw on a probe. So as the space probe, as the Lucy probe was getting close, you go, wow, the brightness changes, which means there's a moon that's coming in front of the mother asteroid, so the brightness is changing, and which gave us a hint that Dinkinesh might have a moon of some sort, but we never suspected anything so bizarre.
They call it bizarre. They never suspected. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Bizarre. And so I am very thankful to NASA, European Space Agency, the Japanese for spending billions of dollars proving Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory is the accurate paradigm that should guide all further scientific explanation of what's going on in space.
Well, I don't know if I would call it money well spent, but it was money spent. So, and it did some good by validating hydroplate, and it might have done some harm with the Who knows what's going to happen with all those rocks they knocked loose up there with the DART mission?
Oh, yeah.
I guess we'll see on that.
Yeah, that's another thing I mentioned to Dr. Thomas is, you guys, NASA, another emphasis that you thought it was solid because NASA promised the inhabitants of the Earth that this DART mission cannot possibly affect the Earth. Well, now it's ejected 20-some relatively large chunks of rock, bigger boulders, and they've now escaped Dimorphos gravity, so they're going into their own orbits around the sun. And it is possible that one of those orbits could someday impact the Earth. And there was an article written by a website, and she was aware of the article where I said, now they're saying, hey, some of these, the DART mission ejected material off of Dimorphos could someday hit the Earth with Hiroshima blast energy. And she said, oh yeah, I read that article, but that's hyperbole. Well, it's not hyperbole. If in fact those orbits, which they could figure out, they now know what their trajectories are, and they could spin it forward with their computers and make some assumptions. But how do we know now whether or not one of them does have our name on it? And I predicted right after it that if it happens, they will call it the DART meteor shower.
Yeah. Yep.
If it does happen, it'll be called the DART meteor shower.
So, guys, we're almost out of time, but I do want to make a Real Science Radio prediction. These are pretty easy when you already have the correct paradigm. So we know this Lucy space probe is heading towards the Lagrange points near Jupiter, right? It's already past this Dinkinesh, and it already astounded and dumbfounded all the secular scientists. It didn't dumbfound us. We found exactly what we expected. So I'm going to make a really, really bold prediction. I think when it gets there, guys, it's going to find floating rock piles. What do you think? That's Real Science Radio's prediction. The Lucy space probe will find in that asteroid belt, in the Lagrange points, floating rock piles, and it will also possibly be susceptible to being hit by some of this debris out there. What do you guys think?
Yep.
That's the prediction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It could very easily be hit by the debris, and so and I'll add to that: floating rock piles, contact binaries, non-contact binaries, asteroids that have two moons that are not contact binaries. They'll find everything that you would expect from the Hydroplate Theory explanation on the origin of asteroids and comets.
Yep. So, guys, we're out of time. So, Kevin, I'd love to do a second show because there's a lot we didn't get to. I was really hoping to get to on this show, including things like there's this Apollos asteroid that we briefly, Apophis, excuse me. There's this Apophis asteroid that's going to have a flyby in 2029, a flyby Earth. It might hit Earth. I think that's going to be interesting to talk about. I wanted to talk about, where creation science is on this because we don't all agree on the hydroplate theory, which is unfortunate. So we want to, maybe make an appeal to those who are still clinging to things like catastrophic plate tectonics. We want to talk about the differences there. So there's more to get into. Bennu, there's interesting stuff that's happened with that asteroid. So, Kevin, are you able to come back for a part 2?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay, well, let's do it. So, for Doug McBurney and Kevin Lee, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.